Hello, my name is Mary Margaret Lacey. I am currently a senior nursing student at UMass, and today I am going to be presenting on understanding breast milk components through storage processes. I became interested in this topic while working together with Dr. Briere, one of the professors in the College of Nursing at UMass, who started the breast milk laboratories at UMass on campus. And I worked as a research assistant for her and helped her with a systematic review on this very subject. I then began to start writing my own literature review for my senior thesis, which analyzes how different storage processes influence the components within breast milk, with the help of Dr. Briere as my faculty sponsor. The reason this research is so important and vital is because human breast milk contains so many different bioactive components, such as macronutrients, energy content, meaning kilocalories, immune factors, and cells, to name a few. And storing breast milk for the later use is a very popular practice among breastfeeding mothers. However, different storage methods as well as the time length of storage can change these components and can change the quality of the breast milk. Therefore, I want to determine if and when these changes to the bioactive components occur and whether the CDC guidelines on breast milk storage currently reflect this. Before we begin discussing the research articles I found and the results I concluded from it, I first would like to discuss the purpose of this presentation. The purpose of this presentation is to remain an overview of the research I covered in specific details in my senior year thesis. I plan to discuss how different storage processes affect bioactive components that make up human breast milk further on in this PowerPoint. I will be discussing how storage methods, specifically refrigeration, freezing, and deep freezing, as well as the duration of the storage, impacts the components within human breast milk. The intended audience for this research includes physicians, nurse midwives, nurses, lactation consultants, and CNAs, or certified nursing assistants, who work on a labor and delivery unit, a maternity unit, or a postpartum care unit. And this research is especially intended for breastfeeding mothers of newborns. Many breastfeeding mothers choose to store their breast milk in order to obtain the right volume and amount of milk and save their milk, as well as be able to breastfeed while working, while sleeping, while committing to family and friendship obligations. And so this research specifically impacts them and how they decide to store their breast milk and for how long. The table you see before you are the current CDC guidelines relating to breast milk storage for the year 2021. These guidelines are used by healthcare providers as well as new parents to newborns in order to decide how long you can store breast milk for and how good it is to use. So for freshly expressed or pumped milk, you can see that at room temperature you can leave it for up to 4 hours, but should not use it afterwards. If you choose to refrigerate breast milk, it can stay in the refrigerator for up to 4 days, but you should not use it any longer than that. And if you choose to freeze breast milk, it is best to use within the first 6 months of freezing. However, it's acceptable to do it for 12 months or 1 year. And this table also specifies that you should never refreeze human milk after it has been thawed. The reason I wanted to show you these current guidelines is so that we can look at them and compare them to the research I found in the research studies and to see if they are the most up-to-date they can be. To begin my research, I started with a comprehensive search strategy using the databases the Cumulative Index of Nursing and Allied Health Literature, also known as CINAHL, the Web of Science, and PubMed, all found at the UMass Amherst Library. Keywords I used for search terms were human milk, breastfeeding, as well as handling, storage, freeze, and refrigeration, in order to connect the two factors I was searching for, find comparisons. The reasons I may have excluded the articles were because they focused on donor milk or milk banks instead of mother's milk. They focused on the pasteurization of donor milk. They focused on feeding administration errors on nursing or hospital units. They talked about manipulating milk with human milk fortification, or they were not a primary research study. A lot of the studies I found were systematic reviews, so I excluded them. And so, when I was screening these articles I found a little over 1,000. And so my first process of cutting down articles was a title and abstract screening. This first screening means I read the title and abstract and saw if it fit into my research question. And from this first step screening, I was able to cut it down to 97 relevant articles that were not excluded for my reasons of exclusion. Then, my second phase and last phase of the screening was that I read through the completed research articles in full. And from this, I gathered if they met the inclusion criteria, which I will be talking about on the following slide. So, my reasons for inclusion, or inclusion criteria, include that the article focused on the effects of storage processes on the components of breast milk. Also, the articles must be published in English for me to understand while reading them, or have an English translation. The articles also had to be primary research studies that were published between 2010 and 2020, so relatively recently, for the most updated data. And last, the research articles must focus on the mother's own milk. It cannot focus on milk donations, milk banks, or donor milk. And so, as you can see, out of 97 research articles that made it to the final complete screening that passed the test for the title and abstract review, out of these 97 that I read in full, only 30 upheld the inclusion criteria. And out of those 30, I chose the best 15 of the 30 to be included in my literature review that I thought were the most comprehensive and understandable to readers. The table you can see on this slide is a table or chart that I made of the screening process that I just discussed. It shows me identifying articles through the database and which databases I use, records I found after removing all duplicate studies, and then records I excluded in the first pre-screening, and then after reading the full text articles, which ones were eligible and which ones were excluded from there. And finally, it shows the 30 that I could have included in my research study, or review of literature, I should say. Now onto the results that I found after researching and analyzing the articles that I chose. I found that there were some trends. So when looking at macronutrients, there were 5 research studies selected that examined carbohydrate composition in breast milk. 2 of these studies found that there was no significant decline for up to 1 week of refrigeration. Additionally, there were no significant changes to carbohydrate content when breast milk was undergoing freezing or deep freezing storage methods. Now, if you look at the lipid content in breast milk, out of the 5 studies that examined lipid content, 3 studies found that lipids in breast milk significantly reduced when frozen, and 2 studies found that lipid content decreased for up to 6 months of undergoing deep freezing storage. Now, if we jump into looking at the protein content in breast milk, out of the 4 research studies selected that spoke about this, 2 studies found there was no significant decline in protein content when refrigerated, and 1 found a slight decline after 96 hours. Additionally, the 4 research articles that looked into freezing found that there was no significant decline in protein content when frozen for up to 6 months. Now we are going to change directions and talk about pH of milk. And pH is just the potential of hydrogen, meaning how acidic, neutral, or basic this content is. So, a total of 4 research studies examined the effects of cold storage on the pH of breast milk. The 2 studies that examined refrigeration on pH levels found a significant decline for up to 96 hours. Moreover, 1 study that examined frozen storage found that pH continuously declined for up to 9 months, while the other examined decline in pH for 6 months. However, it was not significant. And then we're going to talk about interleukin-10, which is a type of cytokine expressed by leukocytes. And the reason this is important is because we already talked about that there are immune factors within breast milk, and this is one type. So the 2 studies that examined the concentration of interleukin-10 were a little varied because one study found a significant decline when the breast milk was refrigerated, while the other did not find any changes. However, one study specifically explored freezing and deep freezing storage methods and found that the interleukin-10 content in breast milk declined significantly when frozen, but not when undergoing deep freezing for 6 months. So what do these results mean exactly? Well, these findings indicate that while the carbohydrate and protein content of breast milk remain protected against storage conditions such as refrigeration, freezing, and deep freezing, the lipid content significantly declines, indicating that lipolysis happens during both refrigeration and frozen storage. Basically, this means that the breast milk is continuously losing its fat content when undergoing cold storage. In addition, when looking at the pH value of breast milk, you can see a trend where the pH values change and show that they are decreasing with the length of storage time, meaning the milk becomes more acidic the longer you store it, making it less stable than when it was neutral. And last, when exploring interleukin-10 concentrations, you can see that they are protected against changes when frozen for a shorter period of time and when undergoing deep freezing. However, when frozen for an extended amount of time, the concentration significantly declines at -20 Celsius. So these I chose to include in my results and conclusions sections because they were the main takeaways of my research. But if you are interested in seeing more in-depth results, I would just suggest reading my senior thesis once it's finalized and published. Here are a list of references of the sources I used for this presentation as well as for my final thesis paper. Most of these are research articles that I examined, as well as the CDC guidelines that I included in the table today. These are just the last list of references I used making this presentation and for writing my review of literature. And that brings us to the end of my presentation. Thank you all for listening to my oral presentation on how different storage processes impact human breast milk. I hope that it was engaging and that questions at all or comments, feel free to reach me at my UMass email, mglacey@umass.edu, and I'll be happy to follow up with you. Thank you again for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.